Thank you for tuning in today to the Battles Within Life podcast. I'm your host, KeyshonneWoodsLee, and today we have our co-host, Isaiah. Now, let me just take a moment and move my camera around so everybody can see my co-host. And to my listening audience, I do apologize that you can't see us today, but if you want to see, yes, let me move the camera around so you can see our co-host. I'm trying to get everything situated now. Okay, there we go. Now you can see us.
Hi, everybody.
And thank you all for tuning in to the Battles Within Life podcast. I'm your host, KeyshonneWoodsLee, and this is our co-host, Isaiah. Now, today we have an interesting topic, and I did some research and some studying because the streets are talking. And today we're going to be talking about the bad drugs that are on the street that are actually killing people. The news is not reporting on it enough, so we're going to bring some more attention to that. And we're also going to be discussing the fact that you dealers out there need to know that if you sell somebody some bad drugs, that you can be charged with murder if it causes them to be overdose death. So you got to be aware of these things. So we're going to bring some attention to those things today. So our topic today is bad drugs on the street, and dealers could be charged. Let's get into it today. Now, I'm looking at an article here that is from one of my sources, NorthsideSun.com. Now, this article is saying that there are, we'll just go ahead and read the article, then I'll give you some commentary. Tragedy has struck several Mississippi families. Now, I want to mind you that this is not just happening in Mississippi. This is happening all over the country. Young men in the prime of their life have been victims of fentanyl poisoning. Fentanyl is an elephant tranquilizer. It's 100 times more potent than morphine. It's being mixed with common street drugs and even marijuana. It is deadly and it's killing our young people. Now, you need to be made aware of this. Now, if you're not one that's using drugs and you know somebody who is, you need to let them know that these drugs are being tainted with fentanyl, which is an elephant tranquilizer that's killing people. It goes on to continue. One victim was a friend of my son and the son of a longtime friend. We are so blessed to live in a state where faith is strong, allowing us to endure tragedy, knowing the resurrection awaits us all, and we will soon be reunited with those we have lost. Oxford Police Chief Jeff McCutcheon said law enforcement has responded to 11 calls of drug overdosing this year. He said 2 of these calls resulted in death. During a recent interview, McCutcheon said there is a scary trend where you're seeing fentanyl in your local drugs. Out of a batch of 50 pills, there may be one with fentanyl. So you're rolling the dice every time you're doing these drugs. So we want to make sure that everybody is aware of the bad drugs that are on the street. And I'm just going to go ahead and give you a little snippet of this article. If you want to look it up later, by all means, go ahead and do so. Right here, you can see it right here. It says, fentanyl makes street drugs deadly. Can y'all see that? Yeah. So we want to make sure everyone is aware of that. You know, somebody that's out there in the streets, they need to at least be aware. You know, sometimes they'll say, well, an addict knows the risk that they're taking. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're just having a good time. And they're not even thinking about their life. And if you tell them, hey, there's some bad dope on the streets, y'all be careful. And they should be made aware that they are tainting these drugs. And if the dealers aren't aware of it, they need to be made aware of it, because if something happens to someone that you're selling these drugs to, you will be held accountable one way or another. That person's blood is on your hands. And you have to be aware of that. And in these days and times, you know, everybody needs to be more conscious about what they put in their bodies and where they're getting it from your food, your water, to your medications. And I'm going to go to another article here. just so people can be aware of what's going on in our society. You have to know that there are hundreds of thousands of people that are dying of overdosing every year in this country. And then when you have, on top of that, people adding poisons to kill people, that's going to make those numbers go up, and there are going to be a lot more senseless deaths that could have been avoided, deaths that could have been just left over to the side. Now, I'm going to this other article on overdosing, and Isaiah, I want to ask you, what do you think about drug dealers giving people bad drugs?
One time I saw on TikTok that somebody took drugs and they started acting really crazy.
The question was, what do you think about drug dealers giving people bad drugs that hurt them?
I don't have a question for
You don't have an answer for them? You think it's sad, or what do you think?
I think it's really sad.
Gotcha. Okay, now I'm going to this other article from RAND.org where it's saying that drug overdoses kill more Americans than car crashes, gunshots, or AIDS. At its peak, but it's no longer just a crisis of prescription pills or heroin. It's a crisis of fentanyl. Deaths involving it and other synthetic opioids have surged from around 3,000 in 2013 to more than 30,000 in 2018. So I'm sure those numbers have went up since that report. Researchers at RAND recently published the most comprehensive study to date on what's driving the crisis, how it could play out in the future, and what may be done to save more lives among their findings. Fentanyl is unlike any other drug problem in modern history. It's more useful to think of it as a mass poisoning than a traditional drug epidemic. The crisis is likely to get worse. Fentanyl and other synthetic opioids have swept through some parts of the country while leaving others almost untouched. There are signs that's changing. Confronting the crisis is going to take more than disrupting the supply and getting more people into treatment. And innovative and controversial responses such as supervised drug consumption sites and fentanyl test strips must be part of the policy discussion. This is a new era, said Bryce Pardo, the lead author of the new report and the associate policy researcher at RAND who specializes in drug policy. We haven't seen anything like this since heroin first hit the streets more than 100 years ago. Now, we just want to make sure you're aware that this is an old article, but it is still happening today. Recently, in the past week, I myself have gotten information about celebrities and other people that were affected by this fentanyl poisoning in their drug of choice. Now, we want to make sure that you're aware that this is a public service announcement to bring awareness so we can save some lives, and to bring awareness to the dealers so they're aware that these people's lives are on your hand. If you're selling them bad drugs, you will be held accountable. So take responsibility. If you know you got bad dope, don't put it on the streets. You are playing with your freedom. Now, I want to go to another article, if you can bear with me. And I want to also say, if you know anyone who is suffering from drug addiction and they need help, I have the SAM HSA National Helpline. It's a confidential free helpline from public health agencies to find substance use treatment and information. The number is 1-800-662-4357. Once again, that number is 1-800-662-4357. This is the National Addiction Helpline, Substance and Treatment Addiction Helpline. If you need help, call that number if you know anyone who needs help with fighting addiction. I want to thank you for tuning in today. My name is KeyshonneWoodsLee, and I'm your host. This is our co-host Isaiah, and we are the Battles Within Life podcast. Today we're simply talking about the issue of the bad drugs on the street and the fact that dealers can be held accountable. They call the charge a murder by distribution charge. So if you sell bad drugs to someone, you will be held accountable. You can be prosecuted as a criminal, and a person's family can also sue you in a civil court of law. So we just want to make sure you're aware of that. And I'll go into detail with this part of the article. A new state law creates harsher penalties for those who illegally sell drugs that result in a fatal overdose. Under the death by distribution law, drug dealers can be charged with second-degree murder if someone overdoses on an illegal substance that they've sold. Excuse me, everyone. Prosecutors won't need to prove the seller acted with malice. Now, I want everyone out there to hear me again. Prosecutors won't have to prove that the seller acted with malice. So you can say, oh, I didn't know. It won't matter. Okay? You need to be made aware of that. Now, Isaiah, what do you think about that? A drug dealer is being held accountable for selling bad drugs to people that could kill them.
I think it's really, really duper sad because drug dealers, I really don't like them that much. So I think it's sad to all the people in the world.
Right. I do understand what you mean. I think the fact that people take drugs to kill themselves is bad in itself all the way around. You know, I think there's nothing wrong with taking herbs and medication to heal yourself. But I have an article here that's saying that prescription drugs can be just as bad as street drugs. Now let's go into this. How many drug overdose deaths in the United States? Now here's a statistic. It says 70,237 drug overdose deaths occur in the United States annually and are currently the main driver of drug overdose deaths. Okay? With opioids involved, 47,600. Now, how many deaths from opioids? It says in 2018, 67,367 drug overdose deaths occurred in the United States. The age-adjusted rate of overdose deaths decreased by 4.6% by 2017, and to 2018, 100,000, mainly synthetic opioids. So they're saying that opioids is the main overdose drug. Now, drug overdose deaths involving antidepressants has risen steadily from 1,749 in 1999 to 5,269 in 2017. Since then, deaths have remained steady with 5,175 in 2019. Now, what do you think about all these people I just mentioned that are dying from taking too much drugs? Isaiah.
Sad and horrible too.
So that is very sad, and I'm just going to go to that hotline. If you know anyone who's suffering from substance abuse and they need treatment, please call 1-800-662-4357. Let me put that number on the screen for you. That number is 1-800